Talking about overwintering. So this is mainly aimed at our new folks. We try to do this every year about this time, so we can get our new members kind of acquainted with this. You may have joined the club just a couple of weeks ago, so we want to get you into your first winter safely. All right, who is new in the club, first year going into winter with trees? If you could raise your hand really quick. All right, if you keep them up just for a second and just look around at all of the people that are not raising their hands.
Wow.
Okay? All those people know what this is all about. They all know how to do this. They've all seen this talk before. So they're not going to really learn anything from me tonight. They're here to be a resource for you.
There's always something.
Well, okay. But our members are here to be a resource for you new people. So I want you to pick out a couple of them, 2 or 3. After the meeting, go up and talk to them. Ask them what kind of trees they're keeping and what they're doing with them in the winter. You're going to learn a lot more that way than you will by just going out on the internet and looking stuff up. There's a lot of good advice out there, but not a lot of it is from here in this part of the country. So always reach out to your members here, to our members when you have questions. All right, so new people, may have just been a couple weeks, but you should know by now that the trees we use are not special. They're just regular trees. They're not a special kind of species or anything like that. We don't sprinkle a special powder on them to keep them small or anything like that. They're just regular trees. So our bonsai are just like trees in nature, and they work the same way, and they need the same things. The only difference is our bonsai are in pots, and that's what we have to contend with. So trees in nature get everything they need from their environment, both in the warmer months and in the colder months. But our bonsai completely rely on us for their survival. So if we can understand what trees get from their native climate, it will help us keep our trees alive. All right, so in the warmer months, this is pretty easy to understand. Everybody should have learned this pretty early on as a child. Trees need 2 things to survive in the warmer months. All right, pretty simple: light and water. Everybody with me so far? All right, so for some trees, this is all we need. This is all we need to know all year round. So the first set of trees we're going to talk about is tropicals. Tropicals are trees that are native to a tropical climate. A tropical climate is one that doesn't get very cold at all. It stays around, doesn't go much below 60 all year. No winter there, no freezing. So here's a list of some tropicals to give you an idea. So if a tropical tree freezes, it'll die. If we take a tropical tree and we plant it in the ground here in our climate, that tree is not going to survive the winter. So, all right. Oh, is that you? So for our tropical trees, we need to bring them inside when the temperatures get under about 60. When the temperatures get into the 50s, we need to start bringing them in. Tonight, there's forecasted lows in the high 40s. So if you haven't brought them in already, now's the time, tonight. Okay? When they're inside, they need lots of light. We could put them in a south-facing window, and we can use inexpensive LED grow lamps for this. Get the LED ones. They're cheaper now. They're inexpensive. They're cheap to run, and they don't get hot like the incandescent ones do. All right, we need to water when the soil starts to dry out, just like we would in the summer. We need to keep away from cold drafts and hot air vents, and we need to watch out for pests. Mainly this is scale inside for mainly my narrow-leaf ficus. It's the only one with a problem like this. Also cats like to chew on my narrow-leaf ficus. So both of those are easy to get away from the plant, but they're hard to eradicate entirely. So, and then when our climate outside matches the climate for this sort of tree, we could put them back outside. So when we get back into the 60s, your tropical trees can go outside and they're going to love that sun out there. All right, so that's tropical trees. Overwintering for tropical trees, the best thing to do is just keep them as far away from winter as possible. All right? Next, here's an example of the LED lights that I use for my tropicals. Kind of what you're looking for. Subtropicals. Subtropicals are a little harder. Here's some examples here. They are vulnerable to cold temperatures still, but how vulnerable depends on the species. This is very variable. Some need dormancy and some don't need dormancy. Again, very variable. So the care varies widely by the species. So the best I can tell you about subtropical species is ask somebody. Ask somebody that knows. You can consult a species guide, read a couple of them on the internet, make sure they agree with one another, and then ask somebody here that's growing this type of plant. Yes, Julie.
We all got pomegranates
Right.
up here.
So
What can you tell us about?
if you got a pomegranate, what was his name? Who did the talk on pomegranates? Logan, yeah. Logan did a talk on pomegranates a couple months ago, and he put the presentation for that up on our chat. So it's
On Discourse?
on the Discord, yeah. It's going to be in the guides and tutorials section.
When you bring
So
yours
look
in,
there.
Larry? When you bring your pomegranates inside? When?
I usually bring them in like a little bit after the tropicals, so like when it starts getting into the low 40s.
It's like 10 degrees more.
All right, so that's all I can do for you for tropicals. Ask somebody that knows. All right, the next section of this is our temperate species. There's a lot of these that we deal with in bonsai. That's probably because we live in a temperate climate. A temperate climate is one where we've got all 4 seasons. Here in Missouri, we've got real cold winters, real hot summers. So our trees that live here have to know how to deal with this. And they need this sort of a climate to survive, just like tropicals do. They need something like their native climate to survive. So if we were to take one of these temperate species, take it to the tropics, plant it there, that tree wouldn't live more than a year because it needs our climate to live. Okay, so temperate species also get everything they need to survive from their environment, even in the winter. Not a lot of people think about what trees get from their environment in the winter. So I think our trees, temperate trees, get these 3 things from their environment. They get cold, they get water, and they get insulation. All right, we need to figure out how to give our trees in pots these 3 things in order to get through the winter. All right, we're going to start with cold. This is kind of the big one. It's kind of the hardest to understand, but this is mainly about dormancy. So trees in temperate climates have figured out that there's no point in them trying to grow when it's very cold and when there's not a lot of daylight. So they've developed a strategy that we call dormancy to deal with this. It's kind of like hibernation. The tree will gather up a lot of energy, a lot of food, store it in itself. It's going to put on some weight, and then it's going to go to sleep, and then it's going to wake back up in the spring, kind of like a bear. All right, so there are 5 stages to this that we're going to get into, but each of these is going to have a trigger for this to happen. There's going to be some change in the plant's environment that we'll talk about for each of these things to start. And then the tree will respond in a certain way. Okay, and then down here, I'm going to talk about what we should be doing as bonsai people for our trees. All right? So, starting in fall. So this is triggered by shorter days and colder temperatures. The days are getting shorter, nights are getting colder. The tree senses this. It stops trying to put out new growth, and it starts preparing for the winter. It's going to kind of try to gather as much energy from the sun, turn that into food, and store it away. It's going to put it in its trunk, its branches, and its root crown. All right, and this is the energy, this is the food that it's going to live off of for the rest of the winter. Okay, so during this time, we should be fertilizing. I also brought this up already. We need to, this is going to help our trees make the most out of the energy that it can get from the sun. We need to be enjoying the season. Your deciduous trees are going to be changing color, losing their leaves. Great time to get out there and just enjoy your trees, enjoy the weather, invite some people over. All right, and we also need to be preparing for the winter. So if you haven't done this before, now's the time to be figuring this out. You need to be figuring out where your trees are going to go, what kind of protection each of your trees is going to need. We're going to be getting into strategies for that at the end. But this is the kind of thing you should be thinking about in the fall. All right? Moving on. So at the end of fall, we start to get into winter. The tree is going to enter dormancy. 3 to 6 days below 40 degrees, that tree is going to go dormant. All right? So during this time, we should stop fertilizing. Maybe not for pines, like Vanessa was saying, but there's, for most of our trees, there's not a whole lot of point in trying to fertilize when they're not growing. All right, we need to let our tree get cold. This is how it knows that winter's here. It needs this to go dormant. If it doesn't get cold, if we start protecting them too early, we can keep them awake for longer than they should be, and they can get hit by really cold temperatures when we get further into the fall and not be fully dormant yet. So that can be a risk for us. Also at this stage, we want to let it get a good freeze or two. Leave it out of protection until it gets dormant. Let it get a good hard freeze under 28 or so. And that's going to let it really know that winter's here. It's going to help it harden up its buds and get a good start on its dormancy. All right, the next one, winter dormancy itself. This one's kind of complicated. This is triggered by sustained cold. So there's a lot to this. I'm going to break this out, and we're going to talk about the dormancy phase here. So dormant trees in nature are pretty hardy. A lot of them are hardy between 0 degrees and some down to -50. Especially for most of the trees we see around here, they're not going to have any problem below 0 at least. Probably 90% of them below 10 or above -10, it'd still be okay. And a lot of them can go all the way down to -50. All right? A tree that breaks dormancy too early is not protected for the rest of the winter. So trees have sort of a built-in biological alarm clock that helps them sleep, stay dormant until spring arrives. So if we had a tree here in Missouri, we planted it in the ground, it went dormant after our first couple weeks of 30-degree weather. And then it's Missouri. We're going to have some 70-degree weather for a couple of weeks after that. If that tree wakes up, starts growing, 2 weeks after it went dormant, starts putting out fresh growth like it's spring, that tree is not going to be protected for the rest of the winter. We're going to turn around the next couple of weeks, we're going to have 20s here. So that tree is probably not going to make it through the winter. So trees are genetically programmed to sleep for a certain amount of time. And how long, so that clock runs, depends on that plant's original native habitat. If it came from a place with really long winters, it's going to need to sleep for longer to survive in that environment. If it's short, mild winters, it may not need to sleep for very long at all. Okay? This varies by species, but a good rule of thumb for most of the species that we use for bonsai is more than 1,000 hours. We try to keep our trees asleep for at least 1,000 hours. Okay, that's right around 40 days. All right? Here in Missouri, we get 1,600 hours below 40 on average per year. That's 67 days. So that's going to come into play later. But we've got plenty of time to give the trees, our trees the sleep that they need. If we wake them up too early, even if we can protect them from the cold, they're not going to like it. They're going to be grumpy. So give them a good amount of sleep. All right? So during this time, your trees are going to be sleeping. That clock's going to be running. We need to keep them under 40 degrees for 40 days, at least. We can go longer than that, no problem at all for the tree. It totally expects that. We need to keep it cold. All right, this is the time we need to move into protection. Around in here, it's a good idea to start protecting your trees once they're dormant. We need to water them as needed, and we need to be planning for the spring. It's a good time now. You're not doing much with your trees. You should be figuring out which of your trees need to be repotted. Do I have all the soil, all the wire, all the pot screen that I need? Do I need to buy some nice pots for any of these trees? That kind of thing. All right? Next, exiting dormancy. So when it warms up a little bit, we get 3 to 6 days above 40 degrees, that tree's going to wake up. All right? So during this time, when we're getting warmer weather, we need to watch the weather very closely. I already said that we've got 67 days of cold time here. If we allow our trees to wake up right at 40 days, we could have to protect these trees for the rest of the spring, the rest of those 27 days. It's almost an extra month. So strategically, think about this strategically. You want to keep your trees asleep for as long as you can, so you don't have to do as much work in the spring. All right? So we try to keep them dormant until we can protect them. And finally, the spring here. Longer days, warmer weather. The tree's going to start pushing out spring growth, especially our deciduous trees. They're going to have a whole new flush of leaves. That growth is vulnerable to freeze. Okay? Anytime we have a threat of freeze or frost, winter is now the enemy. So anytime there's a threat of freeze or frost, we need to protect our trees. That new growth is really fleshy, full of a lot of water. If it freezes, it's going to freeze right off the plant, and the tree's going to have to start over, at the very least. You could really weaken or kill your plant this way if you're not careful. So always protect from freeze. Now, they can come back in the house. They can go back into shelter, or they can even come in your house at this time. They don't need to stay cold anymore. So keep that in mind. But when we've got them in protection, they're not getting good sunlight. So this new growth, if it doesn't get good light, it's going to get stretched out. It's going to look weird and yellow. So we need to be putting them out back in the yard, getting as much light as we can for them. Okay? And then, if there's a threat of freeze again, we need to put them back in protection. Right? And then we move them back out to the yard. And then back in protection, and out to the yard, and so on and so forth. Every time there's a threat of freeze, move them in. Every time there's not, we move them out. That's the bonsai shuffle. That's what we do in the spring. So the less of this you have to do, the longer you keep your trees asleep, the better. Now, we're at the mercy of our climate, but just do the best you can. All right? And during this time, we need to watch our water really carefully. And you're out of practice, haven't been watering for a while. Trees are using a lot of water, sun's out, so they can dry out pretty quick. All right? So that's dormancy. I know that was a lot, but I think we need to kind of understand all these parts of this in order to really do the best for our trees. All right, number 2, Water. Your trees are dormant. They're not doing very much, they're not growing, but they're not dead. They're still alive. They're still respiring. They're still using oxygen and the water in the soil to turn that stored food into energy for their cells. It's just to keep their cells running. Their metabolism is very low. They're not using very much water at all. But we can't let them dry out. So we need to be checking them, and we need to water them as normal. What I don't mean by that, I don't mean you should be out there spraying them with a hose every day. We need to be checking them, seeing if they're drying out a little bit, and putting water on them. Water them thoroughly, and then check them again in a few days. It's going to go really slow. It's going to be slow in winter, and you might forget about it. I like to set a reminder for myself on my phone every couple days. Go check the trees, see if they need it. All right. You can't put water on them when they're frozen. It's not going to do you any good. So water when the pots aren't frozen. All right. So that's the thing about water. It can freeze. And if we've got water in our pot, which is good, and that pot gets to freezing, that pot's going to freeze. The thing is, the trees can't take up frozen water from the roots. So if we've got our tree out in the wind, cold, dry, winter wind blowing over it all the time, that can suck the moisture out of our branches, out of our foliage on our evergreens, out of our trunk. That can desiccate our tree, and that can hurt it a whole lot. So we need to protect our trees from wind. All right? All right, next. Insulation. So if you look around, you don't see insulation on our trees. What am I talking about here? I'm talking about insulation for the roots. Our roots are vulnerable to extreme cold. So this is the lower limit to how cold our trees can get, is how warm we can keep our roots. All right? Roots in the ground don't have to deal with this. Dirt is a great insulator, and the earth is a great heat source. So just 20 inches down around here, that's our frost line, never freezes. There's always water available to them down there. That's why we don't have to worry about protecting trees in the ground from the wind. It's also just 5 feet down, it's 50 degrees all year round. So trees in the ground never have to worry about their roots getting very cold at all. All right? So this is what we have to watch out for. How vulnerable this is depends on the species, and it has nothing to do with how hardy the top of the tree is. If you're looking at USDA zones and things like that, those are for trees in the ground, not for trees in pots. All right? We can insulate our pots with ground contact or an enclosure. I'm going to get into what that is in a little bit here. All right? Here is a table of that I've taken from Bonsai Heresy by Michael Hagedorn. It's a good book. Everybody should get that. He's got a big table in here of 70 species, and I've listed the ones in my yard. And you can see from this that the top hardiness has nothing to do with how cold the roots can get. But most of our roots are good down to 15. A couple of them have trouble around 20. And a bunch of them are good down to 10 and even to 0. So for this, you need to look up your species, know your species, and try to plan your protection in such a way that gives the more sensitive trees with their roots, gives them more protection than the ones that are less sensitive. Sam, yeah.
Every once in a while, you get some real hard snaps.
Yeah.
Is it advisable to bring a tree indoors into, a basement, something like that, to avoid such a snap, or is that increased temperature
That could be dangerous. So if the tree is still dormant, it's still in its dormant phase, and it's still in that lockout, that sleeping time, it would probably be okay. You could force a tree to wake up that way, though, if before it's ready. And if you do that, it's going to be real grumpy.
Yeah.
I would try to keep it as cold as you can. If you've got just a little bit of shelter for that, it would be better probably than none. But keep in mind, if you've got your pot and you have it on the ground or in some kind of tent or shed or even something like that, it's not going to necessarily get to the air temperature as quickly as something that's out in the open would, especially if we can keep the wind off it too. So that's what we're going to get into next, little ways to protect things. But yeah, if you got down to, let's say, 15, it would take some time for a pot on the ground to also get down to 15. If you're going to stay there for a few, like a week or so, you might want to add some protection or move those to a more sheltered space. All right? Okay, so did you have some?
On this, I just want to say that the healthier a tree is, the more resistant to cold it's going to be.
True.
And the weaker a tree is, the less resistant to cold it's going to be. So the trees are spending all year to build up sugar, starches. They put those in their roots to help with this cold tolerance. And so if they had a weak year and they didn't grow very strongly, their cold tolerance is going to be way diminished compared to the same species if it had a strong year.
All right, yeah.
If it warms up outside for an extended period,
Yeah.
here in St. Louis, you gotta, how do you handle that? Because you know it's gonna get cold again. So you
Right.
have to bring it in and make believe that that's the end of the winter.
If you were over 1,000 hours, probably yeah.
What
If
if
you've
you've
got
1,000 hours? I mean, I've seen it do that over
Yeah.
Christmas.
a lot of our trees don't need 1,000 hours, so they'll wake up sooner. Yeah, just try to keep them cold. That's all I can say, really.
Now, Christian,
Yeah.
the soil temperature is not gonna rise as much
True.
when your air temperature may get warm,
Mhm.
but your soil temperature will still stay down
Right.
quite a ways. It stays pretty stable.
Yeah, especially if you got something in a protected area or a heel mill or something like that, it's going to stay more stable. All right, Bill. Yeah.
I mulch most of my 18 in with high bark mulch, and I found even when the cold front of got it in jumped up to 7 degrees because of the sun, the mulch is still frozen. It stays frozen. And usually that gives me enough time to open it up, get the air in there, and cool it back down.
Okay.
So the mulch, in my installation I use, and it keeps them pretty cool, keeps the roots cool.
Yeah, mulch is.
If you
Yeah.
stage your trees in the shade, where it doesn't get that beating sun that we get when it gets to be 50 degrees, knows a lot too, as far as the temperature spike in the pot and
Yeah. All right, so we're going to share that the whole table, not just these. I'm going to share that out. Got that in a spreadsheet for everybody to look at. Do that next week or this week sometime. So let's talk about winter protection stuff, just some examples of things that you can do. We're going to start here at the top with zero protection. And as we go down, we're going to be adding effort, expense, and also more protection as we go down. Okay, so we're going to start out with a benchmark, and this is just our bench. Trees out on the bench, this is no protection. You should be leaving your trees out like this when there's no real threat of super low temperatures, especially at the beginning of the season, to get them dormant and let them know that winter's here. This is good for them to get that cold.
You were saying?
Yeah.
So we should leave them on the bench until we get that freeze?
Yeah, a couple hard freezes. You know, if we get a real cold snap, we might want to add to that a little bit. If it hits 15 or 20 for some reason, and you've got more sensitive stuff, the next thing you can do is actually put it on the ground. Okay, but we do want it to get a good hard freezer too before we even start thinking about protection. All right, so the next thing we can do is put our trees on the ground. That's gonna put them in contact with that heat source. It's gonna get them out of the wind, so it's not carrying any warmth that they have away all the time. So we can add these things together now. So we can add a windbreak to this. So we can take our trees and kind of huddle them all together to act as windbreak for each other. And we can put them in a corner of the yard or a more sheltered place. Again, we're using a windbreak to keep them from desiccating and to keep them just a little bit warmer. All right. Next, we can heel in and mulch them. So this is, we've got maybe a mulch bed or some dirt. We can dig down a little bit, put our pots in that little hole that we've made, and then we can use that mulch to cover that up and then mulch up to the first branch of our trees. That's kind of like bringing the soil up around our trees. It's going to add a lot of insulation, and it's going to keep them pretty well protected. Now,
If you do that,
yeah,
you're gonna have to move that mulch away so that you can see if you need water.
right, yeah. So you probably be a lot of guesswork unless you want to be uncovering all those. But it is a really good way to protect your trees. All right, so here I'm drawing a line. Everything under this line is what I'm going to call enclosures. This is just a word that I'm using for anything that traps a bubble of air around your plant for insulation. Okay? Anytime you're trapping a bubble of air around your plant, the point of this is that it's going to keep heat there in that bubble around your plant. The thing is if it gets hit by the sun, that heat can compound and it can greenhouse in there. So we need to be able to monitor the temperatures and ventilate these structures whenever they get anywhere near too hot. All right? So some temperature monitoring stuff. I brought a couple of these. This is one that I use. Got 3 little things like this and a little digital readout. You put them in different zones of protection in your yard and different structures. And it works really well. Tells you how cold they are, how cold they got last night, that kind of thing. You can also get these little ones like this. These will hook up to your Wi-Fi, and then you can view that on your phone if you're not at home during the day and things like that. It'll also graph it so you can see kind of how the temperature changed overnight or during the day and went back up. So I just got these and I'm going to try them out this year. The point of this is that we need to know how hot it is in these things and be able to open them up and get cold air in there if they start to warm up. All right, so the first class of these are things that we make out of plastic sheeting. All right, these are things like the bench tent. So the bench tent is we just take all our trees, put them up under our bench, drape that plastic over the bench, tack it down with some rocks or timbers or what have you, just make sure it doesn't blow away. And you've got yourself a bench tent. Easy as that. You can also do the same thing under your deck. It's nice and shaded down there usually, so that's a plus. Any of these things that we can put into the shade, that's going to do better for us because it's going to heat up less. Hoop house is another thing. I make some out of PVC pipes. I'll share the plans with you on the chat too. But again, all of these use plastic sheeting. And when we're looking for plastic sheeting, when we're buying that, we want to look for stuff that's opaque. We don't want clear stuff. Look for it to be light colored, white if possible. We don't want black stuff. That's going to be absorbing the sun and radiating it as heat into your structure. And we want it to be thicker. It's just going to last longer for you. The next section of this is like cold frames. These are basically boxes that we put our trees in. It keeps the wind off them, and it traps that air in there. A lot of times they're dug down into the ground or something else like that. If you go out on the web and you look for cold frames, you're going to see a lot of stuff that is clear on all 5 sides. That's not really what we want. It's going to be cheaper for you and better for your trees to build something that doesn't let a whole lot of light in like that. All right, And next section are structures that you may already have. Things like a shed, unheated garage, or a cold room in your house, like a screened-in patio, something like that, just to keep your trees a little warmer. Your unheated garage, if it's attached to your home, it's going to get heat from your home. And all of these things are also going to heat up in the sun too. So you got to be able to, again, monitor and be able to open them up. If you have a problem with keeping your garage door open all day in the spring, this may not be the way to go for you. If you've got a garage, planning on using your garage. All right. So your platinum level protection is climate controlled greenhouse. If you got a greenhouse and you can put automatic ventilation fans in there and a nice heater and all that other good stuff, that would be great. Great for your trees. But I can tell you right now, not a lot of people out here in the club are using that kind of thing. Has anybody here got a climate controlled greenhouse? Mike does. He does too. All right. Most of us are getting along just fine without that kind of thing. So don't feel like you have to have the perfect solution. Most of this stuff will work just fine. All right? All right, things to consider when we're planning for the winter. We need to be able to access all of our trees. We need to get to them, look at them, pick them up, handle them, and we need to be able to put water on them. The next is watering. We need to be able to get water to them. And it's going to be cold when that's happening, so that's something to think about. Also, what's going to happen to that water when it runs off your plants? If you're flooding the garage or making a skating rink for your family, that might not be very good. Also, pests, all these little storage spaces, all these little places are great for pests. They're going to be a little warmer. Rodents are going to like that a whole lot, so that's something to watch out for. I live in the city. I've got every kind of rodent you can think of, and I've never had a problem with this. So just something to watch out for. And lastly, security. We need to be thinking about the physical safety of our trees when they're in storage. Just if you've got them out in the yard, think about kids having snowball fights or playing in the yard, that kind of thing, sledding. All right. Finally, so just to sum up here, overwintering for our temperate species. Cold, get them cold and keep them cold, under 40 for 40 days or more. Protect them in the spring. Water, as normal. Protect them from the wind. Don't forget about it. And insulate the roots. We need to keep our roots a little bit warmer. We need to protect them from extreme cold. Okay? So I've got those hoop house plans. This is kind of what they look like in my yard. And I've also got the root kill temp spreadsheet that I'll share out to the club on the Discord. So I know that was a lot. Are there any questions? All right.
All right, so thank you, Chris.